The Mike Wagner Show is powered by Sonic Web Studios.
Hi, this is Mia Mosinzia, also known as Mia No Time for Love. Check out my latest book, Missing, available on Amazon.
The Mike Wagner Show, also brought to you by Illuminatical, the think tank of the future. The Sweet Psalmist by Serena Wagner, available on Amazon, highlighting the Book of David. And Heidi Tam Music, with her latest on HeidiTamMusic.com.
It's now time for the Mike Wagner Show, powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit online at sonicwebstudios.com for all your needs. The Mike Wagner Show can be heard on Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, YouTube, iTunes, Anchor FM, Radio Public, and themikewagnershow.com. Mike brings you great guests and interesting people from all across the globe. So sit back, relax, and enjoy another great episode of the Mike Wagner Show.
Hey everybody, it's Mike from the Mike Wagner Show, powered by Sonic Web Studios, brought to you by our official sponsor of the Mike Wagner Show, international warring author Mia Mosinzia, Missing, available on Amazon and coming soon, Missing 2 by Mia Mosinzia, soon to be available on Amazon. Double the action, double the fun, double suspense. It's Mia Mosinzia, Missing 2 on Amazon. Also, Mike Wagner Show is brought to you by Illuminatical, think tank of the future. The Sweet Psalmist by Serena Wagner, based on the life of King David, now on Amazon. Also, Heidi Tam Music. Check out the latest at HeidiTamMusic.com. We're here with a wonderful lady who is an author, an award-winning scholar, and professor at Ohio State University, and the author and editor of 5 books, talking about the little-known secret inside the Civil War, and specialized in social, economic, and cultural history of the 19th century America. Also has a new book, which is the first environmental history of the Civil War, depicting the staggering costs of war on both sides. Also explains how military necessity was used as an excuse on both sides to steal civilian food, timber, and housing. Also wrote some other books as well, too, like First Lady of the Confederacy, War Matters, and more. Live, ladies and gentlemen, Plus Studios in beautiful downtown Columbus at Ohio State University. The award-winning author, scholar, and professor at Ohio State University, and author, editor of 5 books about the little-known secret war inside the Civil War. We'll be talking about the war stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, the multi-ton Joan E. Cashin. Joan, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Mike, for that very generous introduction. I really appreciate it, and I'm delighted to be here.
Well, it's great to have you on board as well, talking about the Civil War and other war stuff, which we'll be talking about. You're an author, award-winning scholar, and professor at Ohio State University, also author and editor of 5 books, addressing the little-known secret war inside the Civil War. You specialize in social, economic, and also cultural history of 19th century America. You have a new book, which is the first environmental history of the Civil War, depicting staggering costs of war on both sides. And also the book War Stuff, translated into Russian. It's the first book to do so. Before getting all that, Joan, tell us how you first got started.
Okay. I was a college student at American University in Washington, D.C., and I was a double major in history and literature. I loved both American history and American literature, but I decided I loved history more. Oh. So I went into that field. I got a doctorate at Harvard University in American history, and I've been teaching at Ohio State for most of my career.
It sounds like you have a lot as well, too. What got you interested in history and mainly the Civil War?
Well, I got interested in the Civil War because it's very well documented. It's inherently dramatic. And there's a lot going on about issues that I find interesting about environmental history, material culture, race, gender, all kinds of things.
And of course, you also talked about the fact that it depicts the staggering cost of war on both sides. And how does that, factor into it?
Well, my most recent book, War Stuff, that came out in the English language version in 2018 and was translated into Russian last year. I wrote that book because when I was working on other projects, I kept coming across accounts of soldiers who were taking stuff from civilians. Oh, and wow. As you mentioned, they took food, they took timber, they took housing. And I kept finding this in my research. And I finally thought, there might be a book here. And I decided to do some preliminary research. And I found out that there were policies that both armies adopted at the beginning of the war about taking goods from civilians. The problem was that both armies almost always disregard their own procedures. So they took what they needed to take.
Mm-hmm. Now, is that like considered illegal to be taking civilian food, clothing, housing, timber? Was that illegal from the beginning, or was it simply mutual and simply saying, "Hey, we're going to need your help"?
Well, both sides adopt the Articles of War, which the U.S. wrote up in 1806. And the Articles of War give armies the power of what the articles called military necessity, meaning the armies can take whatever they need for their survival out in the field. But there were supposed to be some regulations in place to protect civilians from losing absolutely everything. There was supposed to be paperwork issued for goods that were confiscated, and they were supposed to be compensated after the war ended. There was supposed to be authorized foraging expeditions with an officer present. There weren't supposed to be freelancers just quietly leaving camp and taking food from the nearest farm that they happened to locate. But I found out that from the very beginning of the war, that both armies disregarded their own policies, and they followed that idea of military necessity, but they meant military necessity to the max. Military necessity all day, whenever the armies need something. And that was true for both the Union Army and the Confederate Army. They take from white civilians, even though they're from the two opposing armies, because the needs of the military come first. And that's something that officers and privates in both armies have in common.
Mm-hmm. And what percentage would you say that the civilians were allowed to keep, and what percentage of was the military allowed to take?
Well, they didn't quite work it out that way in terms of percentages, but they were expected to leave enough goods with civilians for them to survive. But that was really left up to the officer in charge, the officer on the scene. Although sometimes there were no officers. Sometimes it was half a dozen soldiers who didn't like army rations, and they were still hungry, and they decided to slip away from camp at night to go out and find something to eat. So there's a kind of a freelancing, ad hoc quality to these expeditions. And they take food. Of course, human beings need food to survive. They also take timber. The armies use up a lot of timber, building housing for soldiers, fueling their campfires, building plank roads, and so forth. And they also take over civilian housing, especially big houses. They take over structures that they need for military hospitals, that they need for sleeping quarters for the officers. And they assert over and over again, military necessity. We are at war. Therefore, the armies have the right to take this house, to take all the timber on this farm, to take all the food that is in this barn.
Mm-hmm. And what was the penalty in terms of, let's say if the family refuses to give them food, let them live there, timber, everything like that. What was the penalties for refusal to provide the soldiers with that
Well,
stuff?
the civilians are not really allowed to refuse. I mean, some of them object. Sometimes there are verbal confrontations, especially if, say, it's a household where they have people serving in that army. So a woman might say to a Confederate officer, my son is in the army serving, how can you take all of our food? And of course, there are some white Southerners who are pro-union, and they are shocked and offended if a Union Army officer appears and a group of soldiers start chopping down every tree on the place. And that woman may protest and say, my cousin ran away to Pennsylvania to join the Union Army, so he's fighting for the Union, but you're destroying our forest. And the officer simply responds, military necessity, we have the authority to do this. There are instances of physical confrontations. Sometimes civilians whether you're talking about adult women, old men, young men, teenage boys. Sometimes they will get into fist fights with soldiers who are trying to confiscate these goods. There are a couple of instances of civilians who kill soldiers on foraging expeditions. Really? Yes, and it doesn't happen often, but it does show up in the historical record.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
go ahead. I'm sorry. Now I was going to ask you something. Were the civilians arrested for killing soldiers?
Yes, sometimes they were, but sometimes they disappeared and the military authorities couldn't locate them. And the neighbors say they don't have any idea where they might be. And sometimes the neighbors are lying because they sympathize with other civilians. Sometimes they may actually not know, what has happened. But these are intense struggles that go on over and over again throughout the war. And the last winter of the war in 1864-65, by that time, most civilians have figured out that both armies pose a threat to their survival. And if an army appears in the area, many civilians leave. They sometimes they literally run away. And Confederates soldiers are kind of embarrassed and uncomfortable by this, to see civilians who just take off. A village is evacuated within an hour because civilians know that any army that's coming through is probably going to threaten their well-being. But this is the reality of war in the modern world. Now, the way I think a lot of us learned about this, certainly when I was in high school and to some extent college, is that civilians are in a separate world. The war is here and civilians are way over there. They're not really involved in the war. They're just observing. They're watching the war. Well, no, it's not like that at all. I mean, civilians are engaged, whether they want to be or not, in these struggles over material goods. And they often think that their survival matters more. If they have to choose between giving up all their livestock so that the beef cattle will be slaughtered to feed an army and keeping it for themselves, they think they should keep it for themselves. That's a pretty universal assumption among white civilians after a certain point. They think that the armies just don't have the right to do this. And that's one reason I think that the Confederacy loses the war, as the white civilian population gives up and they withdraw their support. They think that the price they're being asked to pay is just too high.
You talk about the Confederates and the whites, being involved in this. Were the slaves ever used in the war?
Oh, yes. Both armies see the slave population, especially slave men, as a population that they want to make use of. Confederates will often just commandeer slave men from a farm or plantation if they need workers to, say, build a bridge. They just show up, and if the master is there, if the master is not in the army, they will say, we need 25 men, and they're not asking. They assert that they have the right
demand, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Military necessity. They have the right to make use of the slave population. But the Union Army also will sometimes employ civilians, white and black, and sometimes there's a coercive element. They say that we expect you to be here at dawn tomorrow to work on this bridge. And sometimes, white men show up as expected. Sometimes they will bring slaves with them. Sometimes free black men are happy to work for the Union Army because they see this as an opportunity to help advance the cause of freedom. But it's the same working assumption that civilians have to cooperate. They have to assist in the war effort.
Okay. You talk about some of the problems you have in the Confederacy, like, if they run away, if they come. What about the Union, though? It's like, same situation. What result on that
I'm sorry, could you please repeat the question?
one? You talked about where the Confederates were embarrassed when the families would run away. You talked about the situation. What about in the side of the Union?
Well, we know that not all white Southerners support secession or the Confederacy. In the election of 1860, about 60% of white men in the slave states voted for secession. Now, that's a numerical majority, obviously, but that still indicates that there is substantial opposition to the war from the very beginning. And a lot of those men joined the Union Army. Lincoln read the election results, and he made sure that recruitment stations were set up in the border states so that white men from the upper South could get there and volunteer. And when the Union Army moved through different parts of the Confederacy, it accepted volunteers on the spot. The usual estimate is about 100,000 white men from the Confederate states served in the Union Army. Now, the numbers are obviously bigger for the Confederate Army. The usual estimate is 750,000. But 100,000 people is still a lot of people. And these are men who are willing to serve in uniform in combat. There are also dozens of pro-Union guerrilla bands inside of the Confederacy. These tend to be populated by white men who are either too old or too young to serve in the regular army. And they commit a lot of raids at night. They set fire to Confederate supply depots. They sometimes ambush or shoot Confederate troops going by. So the civilian population is restive and impossible for either army to control. And both armies have officers who recognize this pretty early, and they find it frustrating. Many Confederate officers are surprised at the depth of the opposition, not just from pro-Union white Southerners, but from people who are pro-Confederate. They just expect the civilian population to acquiesce. And I must also add, there are also apolitical people in the South who don't have strong loyalties one way or the other. And that's true for every war. In every society, there are always some people who are just not interested in politics and are concerned only with their own immediate lives. And they want to be left alone. They don't want to have to support either army.
Right. That almost sounds like what's happening in politics as well, too. And based on your research on the Civil War, documented Civil War, and extensive study, what do you think was the actual cause of the Civil War based on your research?
Oh, that would be slavery. In specifics, the expansion of slavery into the Trans-Mississippi West. And that had been a red hot issue in American politics for a decade before the war, really starting in the 40s, the 1840s, with the U.S. victory in the Mexican War. The U.S. acquired a lot of territory. Basically, the U.S. got the top third of the country of Mexico. And now that question has to be dealt with. Will that new land turn into slave states or free states? And these various compromises are kind of patched together. There's a compromise in 1850. People think, well, that's the end of it. We'll never have to think about this again. But it doesn't really hold because there are irreconcilable ideas about the West. The West represents the future. Will slavery expand into the Trans-Mississippi West so that maybe the country might end up being largely a slave society? Maybe the West will fill up with slaves working on farms and plantations and, various other occupations. After all, if slaves can do any kind of labor, that's been true for thousands of years. They're workers and they can do every kind of work. And the Republican Party was founded in the mid-1850s in part by Northerners who were worried about the growing aggression of slave owners in the South, that they might just take over the entire West, so that the free states would ended up being more or less surrounded by the slave South and the slave West. And when Lincoln ran for president in 1860, he said the expansion of slavery has got to stop. No more additional slave states out West. Although I have to add, Lincoln was not an abolitionist as people understood it at that time. He did not advocate for full, immediate, complete emancipation. He's a moderate by the standards of 1860, but he's still the first anti-slavery presidential candidate. And when he won the election in 1860, it terrifies the slave-owning class in the South, because they see this as kind of the opening wedge. If any kind of anti-slavery figure gets into the White House, that means that the institution is probably going to be destroyed. But it seems to be the case that Lincoln meant what he said. When he ran for president, he said he was in favor of stopping slavery's expansion, but he had no intention to end slavery where it had long existed.
Just one question about Abraham Lincoln. You mentioned about not being abolitionist, like as most people had detected, written in journals, the press, and everything else. Do you think that was one of the issues that caused him to get assassinated, or was it a totally different issue why Lincoln got assassinated? It had to do with slavery, or was it totally different?
Oh, it has to do with slavery and racial equality. The assassin, John Wilkes Booth, as almost everybody knows, was a prominent young actor. He was from a family of prominent actors. He was a star of the theater in the 1850s and 60s. But his politics are also deeply conservative. And he's from a slave state. He grows up in Maryland. And he was pro-slavery and deeply hostile to Abraham Lincoln. When Lincoln made his second inaugural speech in the spring of 1865, Booth thought that Lincoln was planning to give suffrage to Black men who had served in the Union Army. And Lincoln let it be known he was thinking about that. And Booth supposedly said to a friend, "I'll never let that happen." So he believes in white supremacy. And Booth also had some serious mental issues. His mental stability is in question. And some scholars think that he was literally crazy by the time he died, that he thought he was a character in one of Shakespeare's plays. He's an actor. He pretends for a living. But
right, just like many people do when they're in the Hollywood. They pretend for a living, get paid millions of it.
Yes, that is true. But he seems to have kind of crossed a line into thinking he was actually a character in Julius Caesar, of one of Shakespeare's plays, and that he was going to slay the tyrant. But in any case, he's deeply political and motivated by a desire to stop Lincoln from expanding the rights of Black people in the United States.
And another thing that cropped up as well, too, in terms of the aggression of the owners of slaves in the South and everything. You talk about the aggression. Was the aggression considered like with, let's get more and more and more slaves, like stockpile, or was the treatment of like, poor treatment and, whipping slaves and everything like that? You talk about the aggression. Is it like building a stockpile of slaves, or was it like the poor treatment that whip them really hard?
Well, I meant aggression in the political context. That they are determined to get what they want in the American political system. When it becomes possible in their eyes that they're not going to dominate the political system anymore, then that's when they start talking about secession. And it had been discussed off and on in the South for 30 years, and it had actually been attempted during the War of 1812. Some New England states considered seceding from the Union, and then the war ended, so that secession never actually happened. So this was an idea that had been kind of percolating in the political system for decades. But the slave owning elite in the South is very, very wealthy. We have to remember this. Slavery is very profitable for the people at the top. Cotton prices were soaring in the 1850s. They were making more money than ever. And they're used to being in charge. They're used to getting most of what they want from the political system. And many of them hold public offices. They are governors, they're U.S. senators. And the prospect of an anti-slavery president is something that just sets off this tremendous fear of what the future might bring, and this desperate determination to preserve slavery and make sure that slavery will continue to function in the South. Mm-hmm. So that's what's driving the secession movement, is a desire to protect slavery.
Mm-hmm. And plus, too, that the South may have lost the war, but they also won another war. And how's that possible? We'll talk about more in War Stuff with Joan Cashin. But first, you listen to The Mike Wagner Show at themikewagnershow.com, powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit online at sonicwebstudios.com for all your needs. Look at a professional website without breaking your budget. Sonic Web Studios is the answer. Sonic Web Studios offers fast, affordable custom web designs that blow the competition away. Call today, 1-800-303-3960. That's 1-800-303-3960. Or email to support@sonicwebstudios.com. Mention the Mike Wagner Show, get 20% off your first project. Sonic Web Studios, take your image to the next level. Also, time to give an official shout out to our official sponsor of the Mike Wagner Show, international warring author Mia Molson-Zia. If you love fast-paced mysteries, you'll love Missing by Mia Molson-Zia, available on Amazon in paperback and ebook. Missing is fast-paced and intriguing with an unforgettable twist. Takes place in 4 countries, 2 strangers, 1 target, where truth is illusion and those who love be the first go missing. It's available on Amazon in paperback and ebook. Missing by Mia Molson-Zia has garnered great reviews, and Evil Evidence enjoys by Howard celebrities, including Joan E, Forrest Riley, and many others. So grab your copy today. 4 Goes Missing by Mia Molson-Zia, available on Amazon. Coming soon, Missing 2 by Mia Molson-Zia. Double the suspense, double the fun. Check it out on Amazon. Also, Mike Wagner Show is brought to you by Illumnifically, think tank of the future. Bring scientists and engineers together from all over the world, create a method to construct a renewable generator. This unique product operates on a closed-loop system, generating more energy internally that needs to function. The extra electricity can be used to run everything from homes, power grids, phones, and laptops. This power source is renewable, highly scalable, and self-regenerate. For more information, visit facebook.com/Illumniptical. That's ELLUMENIPTICAL today. Also, the Mike Wagner Show is brought to us by Sweet Psalms by Serena Wagner, based on the life of King David, including 30 exquisite paintings in King David Psalms. The Sweet Psalms gives a new perspective on David through the Psalms he wrote and his time as a shepherd, where it started, and complicated yet turbulent relationship with King Saul. It's a story of love, betrayal, repentance, hope, and more. Check out the Sweet Psalmist by Serena Wagner on Amazon. Keyword Sweet Psalmist Serena Wagner. Also brought to you by High-Tan Music, featuring smash hit Baby Come Back, and new music coming soon. Check it out. High10music.com. Also, check out the Mike Wagner Show at themikewagnershow.com. 40 podcast platforms, heard 100 countries. Take us with you on any mobile device. Subscribe to us on Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, TikTok, BitChute, Rumble, and more. And for great gift ideas, go to Amazon.com. Check out the Mike Wagner Show podcast. T-shirts, pop sockets, throw pillows, tote bags, hoodies. Makes great gifts 24/7. Go to Amazon.com. Check out the Mike Wagner Show podcast if you're interested. Email to the Mike Wagner Show at gmail.com, or leave a comment in the audio or video section. And for more great gift ideas, Amazon.com/Mia Molson-Zia for great books and merchandise and more. And support the Mike Wagner Show on Anchor FM, PayPal, and the MikeWagnerShow.com. We're here with the amazing author, award-winning scholar, and professor at Ohio State University, Joan E. Cashin, here on the Mike Wagner Show. And before we get back to more of the war stuff, and getting back to how the South lost the war, but winning a war, you also wrote some other books like First Lady of the Confederacy, and also A Family Venture, Men and Women in the South Frontier, War Matters, and more. And tell us about some of those books.
Okay. Well, a moment ago, you were talking about people who lost the war but won the peace.
Correct.
Yes, that's a really interesting historical process. As soon as the war ends, the ex-Confederate elite starts trying to shape the collective memory. And they turn out to be very good at that. They're actually better at that than they were at waging war. but they're trying to sanitize and glamorize the war effort. And they put together this series of fantasies, that all white Southern men voted for secession. That's not true. That they all served in the Confederate Army and did so eagerly. That's not true. That if there was any wrongdoing by armies during the war, it was always the evil Yankee Army. Confederates would never take anything from civilians. And also that the message to white Southerners is you must agree with this set of fantasies. It's supposed to be central to it's supposed to be central to your identity. And they publish books, they found magazines, they build monuments, they build statues. They're very, very good at getting these ideas into the national bloodstream. And they've persisted right down to the present. So it is true, as many people have observed, they lost the war, but they won the struggle over the collective memory.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the lost fantasies like the perfect life of the aristocrats for French Revolution, and also the British supporters of the American Empire as well, too, the great lost British Empire. I'm kind of scratching that one after what you said, too. And also this ties into the Russian experience as well, with your book War Stuff translated into Russian, the first book to do so. And the Russian is also having experience as well, too, being parallel on so many things.
Yes, there are a good many parallels regarding how Russian civilians have experienced war. I mean, when Napoleon invaded in the 19th century, when Hitler invaded in the 20th century, those armies took everything. They laid waste. They seized every material resource that they thought that they needed. And I think that's one reason why the publisher Academic Studies Press wanted to translate this book into Russian, because there were some parallels between the experience in the Civil War South and the experience in Russia. Although, the countries are still very different. The parallels are not exact, but there's a lot in this book, I think, that would interest Russian language readers.
Mm-hmm. And how does how's the Russian perspective of the Civil War translates into over there? What kind of wars in Russia parallel to the Civil War?
Well, the Napoleonic Wars and World War II. I mean, both of those conflicts inflicted tremendous damage on the physical environment, on the housing, on the forests of Russia, on the animal population, and of course, on the civilian population as well. I mean, Napoleon was bent on world domination, and so was Adolf Hitler. So they have an intense drive to fulfill their goals, and they're willing to do just about anything to achieve them.
Mm-hmm. And do you think the current Russia war with Ukraine parallels the Civil War?
I'm sorry, I am not an expert in American foreign policy. I mean, I read the newspapers, but I don't feel comfortable talking about the current conflict in Ukraine.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to find that out because you talk about some of the Russian parallels with Civil War and everything else. And of course, you also have some other books as well, too. First Lady of Confederacy, The War Was You and Me, and Our Common Affairs. And maybe you can highlight some of the other books you wrote.
Okay. I wrote a biography of Verena Davis, Mrs. Jefferson Davis. I came across some of her correspondence when I was working on other projects. That's often how I get my ideas for my books. And I found that her letters were very well written. She's very articulate. She's perceptive. And I made a mental note, this might be an interesting person to write a book about. So I did some preliminary research, and I found out that she was very interesting. She thought the war was a mistake. She says this in writing before, during, and after. She thought the South didn't have the resources to win the war. And she doesn't want to leave Washington, D.C., which is where they were living for most of the 1850s. Her husband is a professional politician. He's also a plantation owner, but he spent most of the 15 years before the war in Washington, D.C. He served in the U.S. House, the U.S. Senate. He was in Franklin Pierce's cabinet, serving as Secretary of War. And then he was back in the U.S. Senate in the late 50s. She loves Washington. She grew up in a city, Natchez, Mississippi, a small city, to be sure, but she always preferred city life. And Washington, D.C. is full of interesting people. She has friends from all parts of the United States. She feels like that they have a good life in Washington, and she does not want to leave. Plus, she has relatives in the North and the South. Her grandfather, Howell, her maiden name was Howell, Howell. Her grandfather was a Revolutionary War veteran from New Jersey, who then served as the governor of New Jersey after the Revolution. He knew George Washington and Ben Franklin. He's a very prominent figure in the history of New Jersey. Her father served in the War of 1812, and after the war ended, he and some of his friends decided that they would go west. And the west of the 18 teens was the Mississippi River Valley. So he and one of his brothers settled in Mississippi, but he has quite a few brothers and sisters who stay in New Jersey, and some of them live in Pennsylvania. She went to boarding school in Philadelphia and was very fond of her relatives in the city. And while she was living in Washington, D.C., they visit back and forth. So her northern kinfolk mean a lot to her. She loves them and corresponded with some of them secretly during the war and for years afterwards. But anyway, during the secession crisis in 1860-61, she makes several rather astonishing comments. She tells her friends in Washington that if the South secedes, the whole thing will be a failure. When she was getting ready to go to Richmond in early 1861, she said in a letter to her mother, whom she loves very much, she confides things in her mother that she doesn't say to most people. She said that this isn't going to work. She says this will end badly, and when it's all over, I will run with the rest. Meaning they're going to be running for their lives when this is over, and that is actually what happened in 1865. But she's married to him, and they have young children. She's younger than her husband, and she actually had children during the war. The divorce law in Mississippi is very strict, and it certainly does not allow divorce on the grounds of political incompatibility.
or irreconcilable differences.
Right. Their version of irreconcilable differences, definitely. And also, she doesn't have any money of her own. Her father was a merchant who went bankrupt. So her husband is a wealthy man and a powerful politician, and she's married to him. So she goes to Richmond, and her heart is not in it. I mean, she often blurts things out in social settings. She says she doesn't hate the North. She doesn't feel any antagonism towards her old friends in Washington. She sometimes would go to hospitals in Richmond and nurse men who were from the Union Army who had been injured and were now prisoners of war. She secretly corresponds with some of her friends and relatives in the North. There was a lot of mail that got smuggled back and forth. Neither side is ever able to completely control the border. And she has friends and relatives who will hand deliver messages to people that she wants to stay in touch with in the North. And she said in 1865 that the last 4 years had been the worst years of her life.
Oh, wow.
So, and then, she is literally running with the rest. When the end comes in the spring of 1865, she and the children left Richmond at the end of March. And the plan was that they would go to the coast and then go to either Europe or Canada. And I thought that the Davises had some money stashed away in Montreal and or London, although I never could prove it. I couldn't find bank records that went back that far. But he leaves Richmond about a week later, and his plan was to go to Texas to set up a new Confederate capital so he could keep fighting. He's totally committed to this. And then he decides that maybe he should be with his wife and children after all. And so he kind of zigzags back and forth, and he's with her in the spring of 1865 when they are finally caught by the Union Army. And you may have heard the anecdote that he was dressed as a woman when he was captured. Well, that is in fact true. They had unwisely not posted guards. They were in a camp out in the middle of nowhere in the woods in South Georgia. And when these Union companies surrounded them, he jumped to his feet, and she threw a raincoat and a shawl. She threw a shawl over his head and a raincoat around him to disguise him, and gave him a bucket to carry as if he was an old woman walking to go get water from the creek. And a soldier recognized that that is in fact a man, not a woman, and called out, turn around and drop your weapons. And Jefferson Davis wheels around and pulls out his, he was wearing pistols, and pulls out his gun. And she ran over and threw her body in front of him and said, please don't shoot. So she probably saved his life that day. But he is not grateful. He is not appreciative. He thought that he could have escaped. But in any case, he goes to prison for 2 years. He finally is released because the U.S. government can't decide what to do with him. They live in Canada for a while. They live in England. They come back to the States. And he never can figure out how to make a living because he's a plantation owner. He doesn't know very much about, finance or money. He works for an insurance company, and, that doesn't work out. And finally, they end up living in a house that was given to him by a wealthy widow who felt sorry for him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And he dies in 1889. And the next year she moved to New York City. And she stayed there the rest of her life. And that's where she died in 1906. She got a small salary from the newspaper editor, Joseph Pulitzer, who had met her along the way and thought that she was interesting. And he asked her to write some columns for the newspaper. She published a book on etiquette. She's able to kind of eke out respectable living in New York. She was never again wealthy, but she wanted to live in a city, and she wanted some of the anonymity that New York City would provide. Although, truthfully, she never can just blend in because her husband is famous or infamous, and people know who she is. But she enjoys her life in New York. She actually met Julia Dent Grant outside of New York, the widow of U.S. Grant. They met by accident at a hotel outside of the city when they were both staying there. They got to be personal friends. They liked each other. And they had lunch together. Their children became friends. And when Verena Davis died, the Grant family sent some flowers to the family. So her life is full of surprises and contradictions.
And certainly a lot as well, too. And more about war stuff with Joan E. Cashin in just 1 minute. You listen to The Mike Wagner Show at themikewagnershow.com, powered by Sonic Web Studios, brought to you by official sponsor of The Mike Wagner Show, international war-wing author Mia Mulson's Missing. Also brought by you, Lunatically, Think Tank of the Future. The Sweet Psalmist by Serena Wagner, based on the life of King David, available on Amazon and High 10 Music. Check out the latest at high10music.com. We'll be back with the author, award-winning scholar, and professor at Ohio State University, Joan E. Cashin of War Stuff, after this time out.
The Mike Wagner Show is powered by Sonic Web Studios. If you're looking to start or upgrade your online presence, visit www.sonicwebstudios.com for all of your online needs. Call 1-800-303-3960 or visit us online at www.sonicwebstudios.com to get started today. Mention the Mike Wagner Show and get 20% off your project. Sonic Web Studios. Take your image to the next level.
Hi, I'm Burl Barer, legendary American author, and I'm here to tell you about Missing, the new mystery suspense novel by Mian Mosensia. It's really a good book. Very surprising. Never metaphor I didn't like, especially in this book. Here you have a main character whose life has been filled with despair. His wife died in 9/11. His young daughter died of a rare disease. He's not a happy camper. What does he do for a living? He's a physical fitness trainer. When somebody hardly knows, someone he's never met, he only has encountered them on an internet chat line, goes missing. This is his journey. He's going to go rescue them. This is his search for redemption, his search for his own personal promised land. He couldn't do anything about the death of his wife, the death of his child, but maybe he could rescue this woman he's never met. That is, if she exists. Missing by Mian Mosensia, international in scope, vastly entertaining, full of surprises. I suggest you get it, either paperback or an electronic edition for your Kindle. Missing by Mian Mosensia.
Baby, come back.
Heidi Tan has a new release, the remake of Player's Baby Come Back.
Spending all my nights, all my money going out of the town.
The special guest, international recording artist Nils on guitar. And now with her own twist on the classic comes Heidi Tan 2023.
Baby, come back. Any kind of fool could see.
She delivers the punch you'd expect from a seasoned pro with this arrangement of Baby Come Back. Destined to be a chart topper, Heidi Tan, Baby Come Back.
The Mike Wagner Show is brought to you by Illuminatical, the think tank of the future. Illuminatical, a human think tank that brings scientists and engineers together from all over the world, has created a method to construct a renewable generator with this in mind. This unique product operates on a closed-loop system that generates more energy internally than it needs to function. The extra electricity can be used to run everything from homes and power grids to phones and laptops. This power source is entirely renewable, highly scalable, and more importantly, self-regenerating. For more information, visit facebook.com/Illuminatical. That's facebook.com/ELLUMENIPTICAL today. The Mike Wagner Show is brought to you by Serena Wagner's book, The Sweet Psalmist, now available on Amazon. This book includes 30 exquisite paintings by well-known and unknown painters and King David Psalms. The Sweet Psalmist gives us a new perspective on his life in this book. Through the Psalms he wrote, his time as a shepherd in the field is where the book starts, and it goes on to describe his complicated and turbulent relationship with King Saul as well as other events. It's a story of love, betrayal, repentance, and more. It also offers advice on approaching God and living a life that pleases Him. Check out the book, The Sweet Psalmist by Serena Wagner, now available on Amazon. Keywords, Sweet Psalmist, Serena Wagner.
Hey, this is Ray Powers, and boy, are you in luck. Right place, right time. Tuned in to the Mike Wagner Show. You heard me.
We're back with the author of War Stuff, Joan E. Cashin, here on the Mike Wagner Show. And just one more thing, Joan, where can we find all your works at? And how can people get a hold of your book?
Thank you for asking. All of my books are on Amazon, and the Russian, all the English language books, and they've all been published in English. Only one of them has been translated. And the Russian translation of War Stuff is on the website of Academic Studies Press.
Okay.
They translated it and published it.
Okay, we'll certainly check that out as well, too. And Jones, just a couple more things. Who do you consider, what can we expect from you 2025 and beyond?
You mean regarding my
next year?
publications?
Just anything, yeah. 2025 and beyond. What can we expect from you?
Well, I'm currently working on a book on a family in Kentucky, the Shelbys. I'm covering them from the Revolution up to the late 19th century. It's a multi-generational family saga. The first governor of Kentucky was a man named Isaac Shelby. The family generated a lot of manuscripts. They saved a lot of material artifacts, and a number of their houses are still standing even now. So it gives me a chance to explore these ideas I've always been interested in, family, the environment, material culture, gender, race, generational change.
That looks really interesting. Looking forward to having you on about that. And who do you consider biggest influence in your career?
My advisor, David Herbert Donald at Harvard, was a very important influence. David was very productive. He was very hardworking. He was a consummate professional, and I was glad that I had a chance to train with him.
That certainly is amazing from a great guy. And what's the best advice you can give to anybody at this point?
Advice to anyone about
in general?
What?
In general.
Read history. Read history, buy history books. Historians of the United States have produced a large literature. Many excellent books are out there. So read history.
Learn history and don't let it repeat itself.
Yes.
That is so true today.
Concerning Civil War.
Correct. Yeah. And that's very important as well. We're with author Joan E. Cashin of War Stuff here on the Mike Wagner Show. Joan, a very big thank you for your time. You've been absolutely fantastic. Learned a lot. Looking forward to having you again soon. Keep us up to date. Keep in touch. We'll have you back. And once again, what's your website? How do people contact you? Where can people purchase or check out your books?
All my books are on Amazon. The most recent that were published in English, War Stuff and War Matters. They came out in 2018. War Stuff was translated into Russian in 2023. It can be found on the website of Academic Studies Press.
Okay, well, certainly check that out. Once again, Joan, a very big thank you for your time. You've been absolutely fantastic. Looking forward to having you again soon. Keep yourself up to date. Keep in touch. We'll have you back. We wish you all the best. And Joan, you definitely have a great future ahead of you.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. This has been really fun.
The Mike Wagner Show is powered by Sonic Web Studios. If you're looking to start or upgrade your online presence, visit www.sonicwebstudios.com for all of your online needs. Call 1-800-303-3960 or visit us online at www.sonicwebstudios.com to get started today. Mention the Mike Wagner Show and get 20% off your project. Sonic Web Studios. Take your image to the next level.
Hi, I'm Burl Bear, legendary American author, and I'm here to tell you about Missing, the new mystery suspense novel by Mian Mosensia. It's really a good book. Very surprising. Never metaphor I didn't like, especially in this book. Here you have a main character whose life has been filled with despair. His wife died in 9/11. His young daughter died of a rare disease. He's not a happy camper. What does he do for a living? He's a physical fitness trainer. When somebody hardly knows, somebody he's never met, he only has encountered them on an internet chat line, goes missing. This is his journey. He's going to go rescue them. This is his search for redemption, his search for his own personal promised land. He couldn't do anything about the death of his wife, the death of his child, but maybe he could rescue this woman he's never met. That is, if she exists. Missing by Mian Mosensia, international in scope, vastly entertaining, full of surprises. I suggest you get it, either paperback or an electronic edition for your Kindle. Missing by Mian Mosensia.
Baby, come back.
Heidi Tan has a new release. The remake of Player's Baby Come Back.
Spending all my nights, all my money going out of the town.
The special guest, international recording artist Nils on guitar. And now with her own twist on the classic comes Heidi Tan 2023.
Baby, come back. Any kind of fool could see.
She delivers the punch you'd expect from a seasoned pro with this arrangement of Baby Come Back. Destined to be a chart topper, Heidi Tan, Baby Come Back.
The Mike Wagner Show is brought to you by Illuminatical, the think tank of the future. Illuminatical, a human think tank that brings scientists and engineers together from all over the world, has created a method to construct a renewable generator with this in mind. This unique product operates on a closed-loop system that generates more energy internally than it needs to function. The extra electricity can be used to run everything from homes and power grids to phones and laptops. This power source is entirely renewable, highly scalable, and more importantly, self-regenerating. For more information, visit facebook.com/Illuminatical. That's facebook.com/ELL LUMENIPTICAL today. The Mike Wagner Show is brought to you by Serena Wagner's book, The Sweet Psalmist, now available on Amazon. This book includes 30 exquisite paintings by well-known and unknown painters and King David's Psalms. The Sweet Psalmist gives us a new perspective on his life in this book through the Psalms he wrote. His time as a shepherd in the field is where the book starts, and it goes on to describe his complicated and turbulent relationship with King Saul as well as other events. It's a story of love, betrayal, repentance, and more. It also offers advice on approaching God and living a life that pleases him. Check out the book, The Sweet Psalmist by Serena Wagner, now available on Amazon. Keywords, Sweet Psalmist, Serena Wagner.
Thanks for listening to The Mike Wagner Show, powered by Sonic Web Studios. Visit online at sonicwebstudios.com for all your needs. The Mike Wagner Show can be heard on Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, iTunes, YouTube, Anchor FM, Radio Public, and themikewagnershow.com. Please support our program with your donations at themikewagnershow.com. Join us again next time for another great episode of The Mike Wagner Show.